Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight, we first welcome David's favorite Democratic chairman, Harris County Democratic Chairman Gerald Bernberg. And I welcome Harris County Republican Chair Jared Woodfeld, and he's my favorite chairman,
Thank
David.
you, Gary.
And you don't welcome me.
Yeah, you're all right.
But he is right. You are my favorite chairman, Mr. Bernberg. That's why you get to answer the first big question of the day. This week was that big discussion and debate about a debt ceiling. You may remember. But nevertheless, you get to tell us exactly what was voted on that your president signed.
I read that 74-page bill, and you want me to explain it in something fewer than 74 seconds,
Yes.
don't you? All right. Well, basically, bottom line is the immediate thing is that we are cutting out of the federal expenditures over the next 10 years about $1.2 trillion. It phases in, really doesn't hit until 2012 and thereafter. That's the first part. The second thing is, and kind of the more fun part, Congress will appoint 12 members of Congress to serve as a special super-duper committee, and by Thanksgiving, the super-duper committee has to recommend an additional $1.2 to $1.5 trillion of additional cuts in the federal deficit. If they don't do so, then that will trigger some across-the-board, pretty painful for both parties, cuts, but at all events, the debt ceiling will be raised at that point another $1.2 trillion, unless Congress overrides the president's doing so by a two-thirds majority. That's as good as I can get in 72 seconds.
All right, so Jared, did we solve any of the problems this country has of overspending?
No, not really. But what I will say we did was change the tone of the debate. I mean, we talked a lot about Tea Party Republicans through this whole series of debates over the debt ceiling. And the reality is, prior to electing Republicans in 2010 to serve as a majority in the House, the debate was all about what? It was about increasing taxes, right? It's funny how once we got there and we had our folks who stood on principle, the debate suddenly changed, and ultimately it resulted in decreasing revenue, spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. So to the extent that we were able to take 1/3 of government and get about 75% of what we wanted and change the tone of the debate, that was a success.
Yeah, by holding the economy hostage, you were able
by standing on principle.
You were able to continue to have great tax breaks in the tax code and tax loopholes for oil companies and millionaires and all those kinds of folks.
But his president didn't exactly, so I'm informed and observed, exactly fight for an alternative vision for the country than Mr. Woodfield's Tea Party crowd that he's bragging about. And yet, I'm not so sure he didn't get the best end of the deal. What do you think? I mean, because there's minimal impact on the economy in 2012. Future Congresses are not bound to do anything, and he gets the debt ceiling debate taken off the table for 2012. So isn't Obama really happy, even though you and I may be disappointed?
Nobody. And I think Republicans and Democrats, neither of us are, quote, happy, end quote, about anything other than the fact that we didn't go into this economic Armageddon. The truth of the matter is that the deal that was passed is detrimental to the economy. In a fragile economy as you have, cutting jobs is not a good thing to do.
How'd they do that, though?
But when you cut government expenditures, you're automatically cutting jobs. You're cutting a bunch of jobs through
You
this.
said yourself it's $22 billion next year in a $4 trillion budget. That's not a lot of loss.
That's still a lot of jobs. That is still jobs. And by the way, it goes in at a higher rate after that, and you're losing more jobs. As long as you're telling people out there, look, you might want to reconsider whether you should hire additional people because there's not going to be government contracts. There's not going to be spending on the military. There's not going to be all of these other kinds of traditional expenditures, roads, streets, bridges, and infrastructure that we really need. Then you think people are going to go out and hire? Absolutely not. In fact, I think that the consensus of economists is that bill will cost at least 1 million jobs over the next 2 years.
Look, the experiment of government creating jobs has not worked. We've had $800 billion plus spent in a stimulus package. What has happened to our economy? We saw that growth in the first quarter was downgraded to 0.4. We saw growth in the second quarter at 1.4%. This isn't working. It's time to take a different 9.2%. So the Obama experiment has failed and failed miserably. eventually, and it's time to try something different.
Oh, you mean like the Bush tax cut experiment that sent us tanked?
4.5% unemployment? I'm praying for those days again.
No, the total number of jobs which were lost, that was because of where the economy was after the Clinton administration. But in terms of total number of jobs lost, we conclusively proved during the last 8 years that cutting taxes is not a way to increase jobs. It didn't happen. And the stimulus package.
Before we get into the
stimulus package.
next thing you know, we're going to be talking about the 90s, all right?
Or the 60s.
Let's talk about the future
How about
just
the 70s?
a little while. Let's talk about the future a little while longer, and that has to do with whether or not it's the case, as I understand it to be, Mr. Woodfill, that the special committee, which Mr. Bernberg says is going to be meeting about this in November, is going to be allowed to consider tax reform and eliminating certain tax preferences in order to get out from under about $600 billion in defense cuts. So isn't it possible that your party will have to accept one of those two ways out of this $1 trillion hole that we're talking about filling with those ways rather than just strictly cuts?
Yeah, well, I'm always concerned when a committee does anything. You know, you had this Gang of Six. The results of that was a disaster. And you've had committees come left and right. And the reality is, committee designing a racehorse is a donkey, is what they say. It just doesn't work. And so that is a big concern for me. And Jerry and I talk.
What are you concerned about?
Usually the compromise they come up with is something that nobody can live with. On Jerry's side of the aisle, there will be folks that were saying, no, that's too much of a cut to this entitlement program I love. On our side of the aisles, there were folks who would say, no, we're not going to agree to any tax increase. And so this committee approach never works. I prefer to see someone come and stand on principle and work to convince a majority of folks to jump on their side. And so I thought, and I think we've talked about this earlier, but we don't think the committee approach is going to work.
Well, Jerry, your idea, though, that we need to double down on a bad policy is not good. You're right that we have a jobs problem, and that's what nobody has really talked about. Now everyone's going to start talking about jobs. But the question of how do we expand this economy, I think, is really pretty simple. You need to expand the private sector. We're a lot better off with private sector jobs than government jobs, because then they're not spending government money to create the job, but we're having people hired, and then they get to pay taxes to the government. Your idea that we need tax simplification, need to get rid of a lot of these deductions, I don't think there's going to be a lot of dispute among Republicans. We've been talking about a flat tax forever.
Complete dispute amongst Republicans, because the Republicans refused to even consider that in connection with the debt ceiling.
Well, because it was too much too quick because Obama waited.
Okay.
But should we have tax reform?
Okay.
Should we get rid of deductions? Should we simplify the tax code? Should we lower rates to be more competitive? Absolutely. Should we quit taxing employment so in private sector is not discouraged from hiring people but encouraged to hiring people? That's a wonderful idea. But the other problem
that's the Ronald
is
Reagan party, but he couldn't be nominated this time.
Not only that, the same Ronald Reagan who said it was insane not to raise the debt ceiling automatically. Is that the Ronald Reagan?
Well, but that's
you're
the same
talking about?
Barack Obama.
The same
was
Ronald
not
Reagan.
the right thing to
The
do.
same Ronald Reagan.
they all oppose that
The
debt.
same Ronald Reagan
I would
who
stipulate there's hypocrites in politics. Okay?
increased military spending so much that set the debt ceiling problem in
The bottom line is the present system is not sustainable. We've got a lot of work to do to get this system right. Obama's way has not been the answer, but and I will also say this, sticking our head in the sands and saying we will never vote for any bill that increases revenue to the country net is ridiculous. For example, Grover Norquist, my friend, took a position which he's now changed, was we can't get rid of the subsidy for ethanol because that's a tax increase. Are you kidding me? That's not a tax increase. That's a tax giveaway, and we need to cut those out for across the board.
By the way, if the Speaker or the Minority Leader would appoint people to this 12-person committee who were willing to entertain that, then I might be a bit more optimistic that something would come out of it. But I'm pretty sure, I feel pretty confident both sides are going to do everything within their power to make very sure that the people they appoint are not going to be the kind of people who will roll up their sleeves and do something to compromise.
So you're a party chairman, and you have to run a campaign in 2012. Are you going to be happy running that campaign with Barack Obama leading the way?
Oh, absolutely. Barack
Don't you wish?
Obama, sure.
Let me ask you this: don't you wish you could have a primary fight with him?
No, absolutely not.
I do.
We went through. Yeah, I bet you do. There you go.
I remember when you had such a fight, Mr. Bernberg, in 2008. 400,000 people came out and voted in the Democratic primary.
That's absolutely correct. There's
Now
no
you
question.
want a primary that has about 80,000, apparently.
But the problem is, it's not that I want one. That's what it's going to be, one way or the other. Look, whether you should have somebody go against Obama or not, look, Ted Kennedy going against Jimmy Carter probably got us Ronald Reagan. It is those kinds of contests against an incumbent that are so entirely unhealthy for a party. Now, when you've got an open seat such as we had in 2008, that's a different proposition. In that circumstance, then a spirited primary is good for the party, but not when you've got an incumbent president, and particularly not when you have an incumbent president who's been doing everything conceivably possible within the value system, within the core values of the Democratic Party, to try to achieve what it is that he promised to try to achieve. All right, and we fundamentally disagree on whether that's good or bad, but those are the values.
And David makes an excellent point, though. In 2008, one of the things that worked to your advantage was you did have such a spirited primary. Bush's numbers were not good. Conversely, in 2012, we're going to have all those things working to our advantage. Obama's numbers are bad. We're going to have a spirited, well-funded primary, and we're going to have lots of folks turn out in Harris County, which will be individuals. I wasn't alive, but of course I know.
I've been making that speech. I've been making that speech all over Harris County. That in 2012 you're going to see a very spirited Republican primary. You're going to have a big fight over the Senate nomination. You're going to have big fights over who's going to take on the incumbent Democratic judges,
which is good for us.
The reason I ask about Harry Truman is that he ran against what he called the Do Nothing Congress, and the CNN poll that I just read that said that the Republican people rejecting Republican congressional leadership is 58%. It was only this high in 1994 when the Democrats were the ones. So if Obama runs against House Republicans, aren't you in trouble?
Well, no, absolutely not, because I think you need to go
He's
back.
the chairman, not you.
Well, he is a long-term chairman and a very good one.
We're not in trouble,
No, but here's the deal.
Nancy Pelosi.
Go back to 2010. In 2010, we were given a mandate. Our folks ran, they said, look, we're going to cut spending, we're going to reduce your taxes, we're not going to agree to a debt ceiling increase. And these folks actually delivered. For the first time in a long time, they didn't change their politics once they got elected. And I think people admire that, and I think they respect that. And I think if we continue to have that type of principle, that type of conviction, and actually deliver on the campaign promises that we made while on the campaign trail, we will continue to grow our Republican Party.
You just keep that strategy and that tactic, and I'd like to see it.
I want to ask you about the problem, and then we can move on and talk about politics if that's what we want to do. But with perfect execution with this plan, we're going to cut $2.5 trillion over the next decade. That's what the plan says. But if you look at the trends in spending that are already built into the system, the debt will increase by 70% in dollar terms during the same period. With the big three, with the big three spending going up to $26 trillion during the period. So the answer truly is, if we don't get control of entitlements, as well as a lot of the rest of the budget, this thing is going to collapse. We're going to lose our AAA rating. We may lose our AAA rating in the next 3 months, which means higher interest costs of the United States, higher costs for the government, higher costs for working Americans buying cars and buying houses and whatever else they buy on installment credit. This is a serious problem. So, part of the problem is, politically, we got to get away from what I call the games of going after each other and attacking and saying, I'm not giving up anything. There probably has to be some big bargain between everyone to get it done. No, this is actually also a rant. But we need to end up with a grand bargain on everything, Jerry, and we're not going to be able to pay for this by raising taxes. It's not going to work.
That's correct. But you're also not going to be able to pay for it without having some revenue enhancers. Look, gosh, there's so many parts to your rant. I'm not sure which to take. I do agree with you that there's a serious problem with the bond rating losing the AAA, but I believe that's because, having seen what we went through politically over the last couple of months, I think that the markets are spooked about the ability of the United States to function effectively in a political sense.
Well,
and I think
that might question the ability of the United States to get control of its runaway debt.
Well, no, but it's not the runaway debt. It's the reason we can't, runaway debt. First off, I kept hearing this comment that the government should be run like American families run themselves. And how do American families run themselves when they find themselves in something of a pinch? Let me tell you. Well, not necessarily charge it, but in large part. If, they sit around at the dinner table, I just lost my job, Junior's still got to go to college. Shall we say, sorry, Junior, you don't get to go to college? Or shall we go take out a college loan and invest in his future? If somebody in the family needs to go have a serious medical procedure, we don't say, well, sorry, we can't afford that. You're going to just have to do without that. We're going to go charge that. Put it on
Gary
debt.
is right. Gary is right in this to this extent. Is he not,
let
Mr.
me
Bernberg?
just finish this. Let me just finish this last quick point. If somebody loses their job, what we don't say is we don't have a revenue problem here. We've got a spending problem here. We instead of that go out and find some way to increase the revenue, and that is the balanced approach that the president's been calling for. It has got to take into account both entitlement reform, spending control, and revenues. That's what's got to happen in order for us to get in charge of and get in front of.
Well, I was going to also say, isn't it a problem that the United States goes into debt for things that are just normally business would not go into debt for?
Absolutely.
To pay operating expenses,
That's
essentially,
exactly
as opposed to saying, we'll go into debt because we're going to build roads or bullet trains or whatever.
Like
How about
transportation
wars?
and infrastructure? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
We
That's
should go
okay.
into debt for those?
That's what Texas
what
does.
should we
I'm
not
okay
do?
with
Yeah,
that.
Texas does do that, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Big time,
But I
doesn't
think
it?
the biggest problem is what Jerry just said. He's saying that government shouldn't operate like a family. Because think about it. No. Because
I said the opposite.
no. Because your analogy doesn't work. Because in this situation, if you liken the family to government, you've got a family whose credit card's already maxed. You've got a
No,
family
it's not.
whose family who
No, it's
hasn't
not.
tightened up their belt at all.
No,
and
it's
so
not.
all we're saying is don't call the credit card company and ask for an increase on the limit. Instead, stop going to the movies every weekend. Don't go out to eat three times a
government
week.
isn't
Don't
going to
drive
the
the
movies.
Maserati. Instead, go down to something of lesser value.
All of those
cut
are
your
correct.
spending first,
Yeah,
and
like
then
cut-
let's evaluate the problem.
like cut
Your
Medicare,
solution,
cut
your
Social
solution, though, Jerry,
Security,
your
cut-
solution to the problem does nothing to create jobs. All your solution does is make the unemployment
Well, first of all-
situation worse.
Well, we do have,
How?
Jared, you would
How?
concede we have a jobs creation problem in the United States. wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
We
Thanks
have
to
it. I
President
mean, you cannot surely think that we don't remember the 1990s, all right? When the last Democratic president before Obama left office, there was a projected surplus that, if carried out to 2009, would mean we would have paid off the national
out of
debt. Now, when
At what tax rates?
and when the Republicans with George Bush took control, with 6 solid years of government control, we had a drug benefit that had no funding source.
Are you ready
We
to
had
get rid of
two
that?
wars, two wars that we didn't pay for, and tax cuts that we borrowed to give away to people, and doubled the national debt. So, Clinton, 22 million jobs. George Bush, not a single net private sector job created in his term.
Let's talk about the first part, jobs. That's what you brought up. You talked about unemployment in the 90s. Well, if you look at the average level of unemployment under the Bush administration, it was lower than the 90s, the 80s, or the 70s. So it was very, very good. You talk about wars. Well, there was something called 9/11 that occurred. And so we didn't ask to be in that war, but it was brought to us, and we took the fight to the terrorists, and I think we were successful. You talk about all the other issues that you bring up with the economy. Some of the things President Bush could not have foreseen, but I think I'm not for the drug benefit plan. I don't agree with everything. Yes, right. To a certain extent, we did let spending get out of control. And that's what the folks said in 2008. That's why we surrendered the mantle of our majority to the Democrats and gave over the White House, because we did lose our way
Actually
to a
started
certain
in
extent.
2006.
2006, really. It didn't hit Harris County until 2008, but in 2006, you started seeing it turn. And so we as a party, I think, need to get back to the party that we became in 2010, where we elected folks who said, I'm going to hold the line on spending, folks who said, I'm not going to raise that debt limit, I'm not going to vote for tax increases. And that's what we saw recently. And to me, that was encouraging. That was
How many jobs were
inspiring.
created during the Clinton years under the Clinton tax rates? 20 million. How many were created?
Gingrich years.
Exactly.
How many
Let's
were?
not forget- let's
How
not
many
forget who
were?
the speaker was.
Either way, at those tax rates, all right. How many jobs were created during the Bush years with the Bush tax cut? 1.2 million over an 8-year period of time, and you're telling me, that's good enough.
But I'm-
and then how many were we
I'm likening it
bleeding
to
when
the
he left
unemployment
office?
rate.
800,000 a month.
And I was talking about the unemployment rate, too.
Yeah,
So if
well,
you look at the
Obama's
unemployment
rate
rate.
is-
Let's talk about Texas politics, shall we? I mean,
Yeah, let's go to
we have a
Texas.
governor. We have a governor in this state who I cannot believe that you people do not accept the possibility is going to be running for president.
Oh, I think
and what would you make of his Texas miracle should he run? Anybody want to take that on?
First and foremost, I think you're absolutely right. He's going to run, and I think he's going to win. And when you
President of the United States, or-
I do. I think he's going to be the next president of the United States. That's my prediction. I think you've. And look at the
they
field.
saved the tape.
Let's
let's
look at the field right now, and why I think Governor Perry is going to win the primary. First of all, you have Mitt Romney. He's catering to one part of the party. You have Michelle Bachmann catering to another part of the party. Her recent Rasmussen poll came out, had Mitt Romney at 22%, had Rick Perry at 18%, Michelle Bachmann at 16%, and that's without Rick Perry even officially announcing. But in Rick Perry, you have a candidate who draws from not only the business community, but also from social conservatives. So I think he melts together a coalition that will be successful, and he has a good record in terms of the Texas economy. While the rest of the country has faltered, Texas has actually created jobs and done a lot better than everyone else.
Yeah, well, first of all, Texas is still, 49th, 48th in education. Texas is still well behind, has one of the biggest deficits in budgetary deficits. It's got a lot of debt. The way we think in Texas, you ought to take care of building roads, for example, is go out and borrow billions of dollars. It's got the jobs that you talk about are minimum pay jobs. Texas leads the nation in minimum wage jobs. I
think we're tied with Mississippi, but nevertheless,
okay.
What I think
they have
that
gambling. They got gambling.
You would concede, wouldn't you, that Rick Perry is a formidable candidate?
Yes.
He hardly. I don't know if he's ever
for the
lost.
de- for
He's
the
never lost
Republican-
anything.
Right.
He's never lost
He is
anything.
a terrific politician. Here's the issue
Including
with
any
Rick Perry. And you
Democratic
mentioned it.
office he's ever run
yes.
for.
You mentioned, Jared, that he appeals to social conservatives and he appeals to business people. He's tried to do that on the same issue, and that would be gay marriage, because on gay marriage, Rick is pro-traditional family, but in a speech in Aspen to a bunch of Republican fat cats from the East Coast, he said each state should decide what they want to do. And I understand that's consistency with the 10th Amendment, but you can't have it both ways. So that's an issue. And I think that what will happen, my concerns about the Perry candidacy for him is he avoided editorial boards when he ran for governor. He avoided debating when he ran for governor. He only did one debate in the primary, one debate in the general. That's it. And you wonder whether or not he's going to be able to handle a national campaign of scrutiny. This is really tough. And the final thing is you got to really work hard. I mean, being governor of Texas is a great job.
But it's easy?
Well, it's a lot easier than being president of the United States. Ask George W. Bush. He'll tell you how the difference is. So that's going to be the question. And the governor can't be all things to all people. So it'll be interesting. He's the flavor of the month now, and he'll come out and I don't ever underestimate him because he's a terrific politician. But he's going to get tested, and he's either going to be successful or not.
Let me add something
Make
to what Gary
him
said.
tell you who his candidate is.
I don't have a candidate.
Let me ask you to address
Anybody
a couple
but
of points.
Obama is my candidate.
A couple of points of what Gary said. Yeah, with respect to the marriage amendment, I think he later came out and said, I am for a federal marriage amendment, and that's consistent with my principles on federalism, because the states would ultimately have to ratify that.
But you're explaining
but,
you're losing.
Okay,
remember?
but you do make a good point in terms of national scrutiny. I would say, though, he has been two-term head or lead chairman of the Republican Governors Association. Give him a little bit of experience there, but obviously, yes, he will be tested, and I believe he's up for the task. But obviously, that is going to happen.
We don't know, and I don't even know if he knows.
And Jerry,
they're
they're right. Mr. Perry doesn't have to worry about Hispanics voting against him because of his views on with as far as because there won't be anybody in that primary, so he's got a safe ride there, right?
Well, I don't know that he's as conservative as you think he is on immigration.
David, sometimes your questions go so far over my head. I think I need to follow a flight plan.
I'd say it's predictably that he's predictable he's going to be successful in the Republican primary. He's got nobody to vote against him.
If Perry's the nominee,
now I understand
if Perry's the nominee, does he quit as governor before the election?
Of course not.
Okay, so
I think it's
keeps
just
the job.
like President Bush.
And of course, if he is successful, it creates an unbelievable amount of open jobs. Because if
Don't worry
Dewhurst
about
moves
it.
on, all right, let's talk about the Democrats.
Okay.
Who you got? You got General
Barack
Sanchez
Obama.
for the Senate. You got Barack Obama, who Jerry, I'm going to tell you, the guy's not ready for prime
Do you
time.
have
Not
Sanchez?
even now.
I
After
haven't
3
spoken
years
to
of
him.
experience as president, he still doesn't have enough experience to be president. I'm telling you.
He's got more experience in that office than Rick Perry. He's got more experience than Mitt Romney. He's got more credibility than a Michelle, what's her name, Bachmann.
And
no,
he
I
passed
think.
Romney care, Jerry. I mean, Jerry.
that's
he
right.
did.
And
And he's got.
it's
And let me seriously, when you take a look at the electoral map, he wins. It's that simple. It's not.
Perry or Obama?
Obama.
Oh,
Perry's not
I
going to.
disagree
Perry's
with
not going
that
to take
one.
Colorado. I mean, he's not going to take Colorado. He's not going to
You
take.
really think even with redistricting he wins when you look at the electoral?
Yeah, I do agree that he picks up an extra 4
Jerry,
votes in
I'm
Texas.
going to tell you, I've said this, and David knows.
And one more-
Obama is not getting reelected, in my opinion, because the country cannot stand 4 more years of his leadership unless he pulls a false surprise in 2012.
Oh, like killing Mr. Osama bin Laden. I'm sorry, he did
yes,
that.
he did that, and he gets credit for that. So I'm not taking that he wouldn't do it, and that's taking out the Iranian nuclear program, which he might do in order to get reelected. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it, but he might do it, and that would do it.
You're not surely going to say that even Michelle Bachmann beats Barack Obama. Is that what you're saying?
Michelle. She is not going to be the nominee. Look,
So she would lose to him then?
No, she's not going to be the
Ron
nominee.
Paul.
But I think we all agree, and I've heard each one say this election is going to be about jobs,
Not gonna be. It's
jobs.
over.
Period.
And Mitt Romney's the best candidate for that because he's
Absolutely
actually
not. Rick Perry. Well, Mitt Romney's a good man, but Rick Perry's the best candidate for that, if you ask me. Because if you go look at since the recession ended in June of 2009, over a third of all jobs around the country have been created in Texas. And so I think when
Yeah,
you're
but
going
we have a story to tell.
we do have a great story to
Now, the
tell.
question
And
is-
Jerry talks about low-paying
Yes.
jobs, but there's still jobs.
Jerry,
and I guarantee a
well,
lot
here's
of
the
people like to
question.
have a low-paying
And Jerry,
job
too,
versus a
what did
job.
he
Does
do to create
Texas
that?
survive? Does Texas survive the increased scrutiny? That are we still going to be looked at as this wonderful miracle, or are they going to start learning that we actually have a few warts too? What's going to happen?
When you ask that question, you know the answer to it. It's obviously B.
B, we're
The
going
latter.
to find out Texas actually has a few warts, at least from the national media, Jared. So it'll be interesting how that all works out.
In which case, we'll just secede from the national.
So I guess what Gary
Nothing
is
something said for
saying.
that.
I guess what Gary is saying, although he won't quite admit it, is that we will be seen as the banana republic we are. Hey,
That's your
thanks.
words.
That's the closer. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, David, that's
Thanks,
your words,
Jerry.
not mine.
And we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the program bar, Red, White, and Blue. And read about the shows, the guests, watch a follow-up discussion, if you can stand one. And until next time, get informed and get active.
That's just your words.